Hi, and welcome back to the Shane Plays Out of the Abyss Notes series. Last session, we had just barely escaped Gracklestug by the skin of the party's teeth. We're on the boat with a deep-known captain and his crew, and Ilvara, the drow priestess of Lolth, who had been chasing them forever, was stymied in her efforts at the last minute by the dragon Thimberchod, who owed the party a boon. So, that is where we'll start. They're heading towards Sloobludop in the Darklake region. I call it the Darklake region because it's not just one big lake, like a big Great Lake, like in the United States, the Great Lakes, but it's a series of connected waterways and passages and that sort of thing. So take the idea of it just being one huge lake and just kind of toss that out of your head. And in the chapter that talks about the Dark Lake and also Sloobludop, goes into more detail on that. Before I actually talk about what happened with the party this week, I had somebody ask in the comments I think it was the previous video, asking, how do I prepare and how do I DM and that sort of thing. And I said I'd try to remember to address that, and I have. So I've remembered. Yay! Um, so First of all, I'll talk a little bit about my approach to DMing, and then I'll talk about some of the materials that I use. The first thing I'll say about DMing is I don't over prepare. Now, I got to be very clear. Everybody's different. Every player is going to be different. Every DM or GM or whatever is going to be different. So what works for me may not work for somebody else, and what works for somebody else may not work for me. And I do not pretend to be the world's greatest DM. I enjoy DMing, and I think that my games are enjoyable because I have players that keep coming back. And I think that's the number one thing. If you say, am I a good DM or am I a good GM or is this campaign going well or whatever, are your players coming back? Are they showing up every week or whatever? Um, and I have some diehard players that show up every week, rarely if ever miss. Um, and always seem to have a good time. So, you can ask people, hey, are you enjoying this? And they can say yes or no or whatever. Or they can, but I think that's the number one way to know if you're having a successful game. Are the players showing back up on their own, or are you kind of having to poke and, hey, are you coming and da da da, and kind of beg them to come? Um, or you always got people dropping in and out. I've got a pretty solid group. I've always got 6 or 7 players. We've had 10, 11, 12. Sometimes it's gotten too big. So that, I think the game goes pretty well. Having said that, there's, and somebody's just sent me a message over Steam. So that was that noise. I usually keep my Steam turned off, but my Steam messages, but I just rebooted my computer and forgot to turn it off, so I apologize for that. Probably more distracting me explaining what that noise was than the actual noise itself. So, but I do try to turn all that stuff out down to keep distractions to a minimum. But anyway, are people showing up? Is the game going pretty much every week without a lot of hassle? I think that's your number one clue. Is it a good game, or am I a good DM, or am I a good GM or whatever? And especially people who aren't your friends are showing up regularly. They're enjoying it. They're coming back because they're having a good time. So number one tip on that. Now, as far as DMing itself, I don't over prepare. In fact, I probably don't prepare enough. I like to have a general idea of what's going to happen. Um, and then just kind of do a blend of referencing the book and sort of ad-libbing. And for me, that works pretty well. In fact, sometimes that leads to, I think, a better game than if I had, prepared, because a lot of the ad-libbing and spontaneity, I think, is what leads to the energy of me being a DM that people seem to enjoy. So for me, I've always been fairly quick on my feet or whatever. That doesn't mean I'm super smart or anything. That's just one of my traits, is that for the most part, I'm able to roll with things. So I'm able to incorporate that style into my DMing of games. Um, and another thing, I've done quite a bit of public speaking in my life. and I've gotten pretty good at it. And I found out early on that I work much better off an outline when I'm going to give a speech or speak in public than I do a full speech. If everything's written down and I know exactly what I'm going to say word for word for word, then it can come off wooden. Like, oh well, you're just reciting something you memorized. Or B, if you lose track of where you're at in your memorization, then you get all flustered and you're like, oh, and you have to get back on track with what you memorized. So I speak much better extemporaneously, which kind of means that it's kind of spur of the moment. I have kind of an outline of points I want to hit, but all the stuff's not filled in, and I just kind of go launch in there, and that style works for me well for dungeon mastering as well. Now, that's not to say don't be familiar with your material that you're DMing. There have been nights where I was like, I should have prepared more. And it still came out okay, but I still should have prepared more. And there's still times where it's not fair to my players. I got to bust open the book and look for a couple of minutes and say, okay, and then move forward. So, and that's not cool to the players. So I try to minimize that as much as possible. But in general, I do have a pretty good idea of what's going to happen and where I want to go with things and pretty much what the players may or may not be able to encounter. But I don't have every little thing memorized. I haven't spent hours and hours and hours reading the adventure like I'm preparing for like a final exam or anything. That's just not my style. There's other people that do that, and that's fine. This is subjective. It's not objective. It's subjective. There's no right or wrong in it. As long as the DM is enjoying DMing and the players are enjoying playing, then it's all good. But if the players ever become frustrated with the DM and the players aren't just jerks, but like they're like, hey, this DM is not fulfilling their part of the bargain here. They're coming unprepared and they're not doing a good job and all that. Then yeah, you need to increase your preparedness and your chops and all that. Speaking of chops, like, do you have your chops, your DM chops? One thing I don't know, I came from, man, I started playing way back in the early 80s. This whole idea of role playing as a craft, like I want to improve my craft, that's just not my mindset. And if it's yours, if you're watching this and that's your mindset, I'm not here to tell you that's bad. I just don't see it that way. It's a game. I like to have fun with it. I've been playing D&D for years and years and years and years, all these different role-playing games, but I don't see it as my craft. And what I mean by it is I just don't approach it with that level of seriousness or reverence or something like that. Now, there's other people I see them talking online, and they're very serious about it. Like, hey, I want to improve my craft. And maybe it is a craft for me, and I just don't think of it that way. But that's just, I'm just kind of trying to explain my mindset. It's a lot of fun, um, and I want people to have fun. I want to tell a good story. I want to hit powerful narrative moments and have fun combats and all that. But I just don't see it as like a craft, like I'm like an actor with a career in acting or something like that. Now, if somebody else, if you're listening to this and that's how you approach it, that's fine. I'm just saying that everybody has a different approach. So, the other thing that I want to say on kind of the style of DMing or DMing itself, a lot of dungeon masters and game masters, or if you're playing castles or crusades, castle keepers, whatever the ghost master, if you're playing the old Ghostbusters game, I think that the DMs feel like they have to do whatever the players want. They have to absolutely make sure that the players are satisfied and having fun and all that. And yes, that's important. Okay, because if you've never heard this concept of a social compact, it's sort of kind of an unwritten agreement that hey, you're going to do this and we're going to do this and we're all going to have fun here. And it's part of the manners of the game and the etiquette of the game and all that stuff. So as a DM, you don't want to be a jerk, and you want to make sure to tell a story that they're going to enjoy. But that doesn't mean that you're like their mom or dad and their life is in your hands, right? So what I'm saying is that the DM isn't there just to serve the player's needs. You're all there together. And as much energy and as much, preparation and importance and this and that and the other as the DM brings to things, why would somebody put that much effort into it? Because DMing is fun, but it's an effort. I guarantee you, and I'm not trying to toot my own horn, let's just be honest here. The DM or GM or whatever is probably working the hardest of anybody at the table, both outside the game and at the game. So why would I do that if I'm not enjoying it either? And what I mean by that, you have some players that say, well, I just want to play this kind of game, and that's it, and I want to do just this with my player, and da-da-da and all this stuff. And it's like, well, if that breaks the enjoyment of the game, because we have an investment in the game too, and we want the world to be fun and interesting to us. And if the stuff that the players want to do is diametrically opposed to the DM, why would the DM do that? Why am I going to show up week after week after week to run a game that I don't even enjoy because I don't like, the world or things that we've allowed or been forced on the DM. So what I'm saying is, if you're a DM, I would encourage you to have that mindset as well. And I'm not talking about being iron fisted. This is how it's going to be. I'm talking about you're a player too, and you have justification in wanting to enjoy the game and the setting and all that just as much as the players. So, and in fact, in some ways, you're more invested. So what I'm saying is that just because the players say, "Well, I want to do this," doesn't mean you just have to do it, to make them happy to keep them around, right? There's got to be a maturity level all around. But yeah, there's stuff that players have asked for in the game, and I usually allow most stuff, but every now and then I'll be like, I'd really rather not do that. And one of the reasons is because that violates the concept that I have of the game world. And if I do that, that's one less, measure of investment that I have in the game. So that doesn't mean, negotiate with your players, talk to them, say, okay, and try to see it from their side and let them make their case and that sort of thing. But for me, this is for me, okay? I'm not saying that everybody else has to be like this. The way I've grown up and played D&D, for the most part, fantasy role-playing for me is a Tolkien-esque type of thing. All this crazy this and that and the other. And like Eberron, I have no interest in that setting, even though I hear it's an amazing setting. But I probably wouldn't run a game in Eberron. And I wouldn't want my players to like, well, you either run Eberron or we're out of here. I'd be like, okay, you're out of here. Again, I'm not saying that Eberron is bad. People love it. Go for it. But what I'm saying is, for me personally, if I'm running fantasy role playing, in my head, and that doesn't mean for one shots. I would run Eberron as a one shot, or even like a limited, like 4 campaign, 4 arc thing. I'll do anything once or twice just to test it out. Oh, let's check this out. Let's check that out. Oh yeah, that'll be fun. I'm talking about an ongoing, deeply world building. That's just the Tolkien type fantasy is what appeals to me. So, even though I allow it, like Dragonborn and Tieflings and all that stuff, it just doesn't jibe with, but I'm like, yeah, like I have kind of a core of what I want. And then there's sort of another concentric circle that goes out. That's sort of like, it's not really my thing, but it's not a big deal. I'll totally let it go. And then there's some other stuff like a third ring out. Where like, I just don't want that in the game. Because then it violates my concept of what the game world should be. So I said all of that just to say that, you've got some investment as a DM in wanting the world to be interesting to you too. Don't let the players dictate to you. That doesn't mean don't listen to them. Let them express what they want, because everybody's working on it together. It's a shared hallucination. But don't be terrified of your players not being happy. They have an investment in showing up and bending a little bit, and you bend for them a little bit, but don't be held hostage by, if my players aren't happy, woe is me. Don't do that. Be yourself. Make sure that you enjoy the game world too. So, enough about the mindset of DMing. I was asked about the materials that I use. First and foremost, of course, you got, player's handbook and dice and um, uh, Dungeon Master's Guide and all that stuff. Um, but you've also, and then I just can't use a DM's screen, whether it's even applicable to the something, block the player should not be seeing everything. Use the screen. So I've got the 5th edition screen, which I think is pretty. I think that the rules or the stuff they put on the inside I hardly ever reference, but it's very handy because you don't want the players seeing everything. Um, and it's also, you got the DM screen, and sometimes it's fun to just roll dice back there, and you're not even rolling it, you're just rolling dice, and they mean nothing, but it's a heightened sense of, ooh, what's going on among the players. Um, but yeah, I mean, I'm a firm believer in a DM screen of some sort, whether it's I got this DM screen from AD&D, back in the 80s, and I use it. Well, still, that's fine. Just something that, kind of gives you some privacy. Um, I always keep ruled paper around. I can't. I always keep this around. And this is how I track initiative. I know a lot of people do the index cards and all that, but I have everybody roll initiative, and I write down the initiative order, and then off to the side I write down the hit points of the opponents, and after the battle's over I crumple it up and throw it away, and this is how I do it. And this is also handy just to have scratch paper around it. You might need to sketch something out or something like that. Speaking of sketching stuff out, I have this whiteboard that is also magnetic. I actually bought this a little over a year ago, about a year and a half ago, for my first session of the campaign we're in right now, the group I'm in right now. I went to Office Depot, Staples, whatever, Office Despot, and one, it's handy because if you draw a quick map on here, you can use these little magnets that came with it and put them on there. I've got the several different colors of the whiteboard markers. I can just draw whatever I want. I'll draw a little happy face for you. Hi, yay, happy. Okay, so, and sometimes I'll draw, as they're going through a dungeon, I'll draw a little mini map of, to kind of give them a general idea of where they're at. And then if battles or stuff happen, we'll go to the big grid map. Which I can't, back in the 80s when I used to play D&D with my friends, we never used miniatures. Sometimes we would use dice to kind of get a general idea of where everybody was, but we didn't use, hexes or squares or anything like that. And I just cannot recommend enough. Get yourself a battle map. Even if you never draw on it, just knowing where your squares and all that stuff are, it just, I think that D&D combat and a lot of other RPG combat really shines when you get on a map. And these maps, now we use a different one. I have a player that brings his map and we use it, but it's basically this. It's just a double-sided map. Now this map has hexes on one side and squares on the other, and you can only use water-soluble pins on this one, like on an overhead projector type thing. And the one that my player brings uses the whiteboard markers, which in my opinion is better. But get yourself one of these. It helps so much. I really think that Dungeons & Dragons combat really shines when you're using the grid system. Each square is 5 feet and you're using miniatures or dice or something to represent where everybody's at. It just really shines that way. So I can't, and it's just been in the past few years that I've really started using miniatures and all that, and it's so much better. But this is not just for maps. I mean, you can draw little, diagrams or whatever, draw a little, figure or something. This is so handy. And then you can just, wipe it off and you're done. And then you start over. So this is extremely handy. And this wasn't that expensive, like $10 or something. I don't know. Of course, I have always keep, I'm a big fan of mechanical pencils. So I always keep some mechanical pencils around. And then a pen, always have extra pens and pencils. This stuff helps. And then, I got plenty of whiteboard markers and stuff like that I keep with me for drawing. And a lot of times I'll draw on the map. I'll actually draw out, a pretty detailed, I'll say, hey guys, take 5, and I'll draw like a pretty detailed map, especially if I think it's going to be a larger battle, with terrain and all that stuff on it. It just helps so much. And the map that my player brings, same thing. You can just use a paper towel or a wipey or something like that and just wipe it off, and you're good to go. Can't stress enough how handy that is. Now, I think I showed these before, but a player of mine actually bought these for me, and they're little stencils, right? Multicolored stencils, butterflies and dinosaurs and all kinds of stuff, little shapes. But we use these for inspiration, right? So when somebody gets inspiration, I just hand it to them. And then when they spend their inspiration, they hand it back to me. And there's plenty, it's pretty hard to run out of inspiration. So this is really handy. And I think he said he picked this up at like a dollar store or like Kroger or something, Walmart for like a buck or two. So this is really handy. If you're playing D&D 5th edition, some physical method to keep track of inspiration, I think is really handy. Because if you just say, hey, you got inspiration, they'll forget to spend it. And I don't, the way I do inspiration, it doesn't carry over. So you either, unless they did something amazing at the end of the session, I'll try to make a note at the beginning of the next session, say you've got inspiration from last time. But I don't allow it to carry over. I don't allow, you got, one inspiration at a time, basically. And you either spend it or you don't that session. But it's very handy to remember that. Now, I also keep this little folder here that has, for any campaign I'm working on at that time, I have a folder for that campaign. And for this campaign, I've got a log. You probably can't see that, but I've got a log of my players where I get their name, their character name, their class, their race, their alignment, and then their passive perception. And this also tracks the madness level for Out of the Abyss. And this is really helpful, especially playing at a store, because people will come in and out. And it's helpful for me to have this. So I don't refer to it that often, but like if madness comes up or if I need passive perception or something, instead of going, what's your passive perception, and giving away, right, that, oh, there's something going on, then, I can just refer to that. Probably need to get that updated. It's been a while since I've updated that with the players. And then I've got, I've had a couple of players give me backgrounds on their characters, or just little interesting things, or notes like, hey, my character, my guy who plays a bard gave me some notes on stuff that he's looking for, like his uncle's rapier. He likes to play the lute or a recorder, a viol, and stuff like that. So he gave me some notes that I can keep in mind. And as things unfold, and write that stuff down or whatever, keep it somewhere, because you'll forget. They'll mention it to you, be like, oh yeah, and then you'll totally forget. So, and then I've got with the Underdark, with Out of the Abyss, I have a travel log that each session I write down what date was the real date in the real world that we played. How many days went by? Did they do any longer short rests? And then while the pursuit level was going on with Elvira, I was keeping track of the pursuit level. And then this is handy to refer back to go, oh, they've been in the Underdark this long, or, whatever. But it was very important during the pursuits. And I may pick the pursuit up later again with Elvira, but there's those rules that are given, I think, in Chapter 1 in the Velkenvelv escape chapter, where there's these whole pursuit mechanics that are given on how they, how you calculate how close the drow hunting party is to them. So it's very important to them. But now I'm just keeping track of it because I'm curious, how long have they been in the Underdark? I think that's just interesting, and it make little special notes. And then I've also got off on one side here, as they kill stuff, I'm keeping track of an experience log. So that's handy. Now, for Out of the Abyss proper, I've got some NPC printouts here, because there's so many NPCs to keep up with. And these were, I'm pretty sure previous videos of mine had links to these, but I think I just searched for like Out of the Abyss NPC character sheets or something like that. And you get not only Now I made this printout of the little grid of their faces, but you can find these NPC character sheets, which are super helpful. And then there's also, I found some helpful notes, and I know I've linked these in a lot of the Gracklestug videos, where it gave you an encounter map of all the different quests and subquests that can happen in Gracklestug. It gave you a who's who, in Gracklestug, like named NPCs and who they are. Um, and then it gave you um, stat blocks on like Duergar, Darkhaft, um, Darrow Savant, Droki, Narak, all that stuff. So this was really helpful to have, especially, I mean, Gracklestug, there was so much going on. So that encounter map and all the NPCs and, stat blocks and stuff like that was really, really handy. And look on some of my previous videos, especially the Gracklestug, and all the every Gracklestug video that I had, I put those links in there on how to find that stuff. And then last, I've got, of course, my dice and all that, but I've got this little bag here. I don't even know. I think it's like an alien. Yeah, it's an Alienware laptop case that I picked up. I think it was just given to me, and it's got multiple pockets in it. It's about yay big, and this is where I keep everything. I keep, in the middle. I don't know if you can see in there, but there's all my books. That's just D&D stuff. There's pockets with dice and all this other junk, and so this I just put everything in here and carry this with me when I go DM. So that is probably more information than anybody wanted or cared to hear, but those are some of my materials and how I prepare. Again, I do prepare, but I don't what I consider over prepare. I don't cram like I'm getting ready for a vital final exam or midterm. I just kind of somewhat familiar, and then what's going on, know where to look stuff up, be ready to ad lib. I'm a very ad lib style DM, and then I can't stress enough. I've mentioned this in other videos. I'll say it again here now. One of the things I struggle with as a DM, and I think this is a very important skill, is knowing pretty much where you want to end each session. And like I said, we play roughly 2 hours once a week up at the game store. It's very important to me to try to hit, okay, we're going to end here. We're going to end here. We're going to end here. And to have, I don't know how I'm going to get there. I'm going to let it happen naturally, but that's kind of roughly the point where I expect to end. And I'm better at it sometimes than others. And usually when I mess it up is when I throw something in at the last minute, ad-libbing that I think will be interesting, and it just really blows everything up. So I think that's a really important skill. Okay, now 30 minutes into the video, I'll do a quick recap of how things went this past session. So they were on the boat, and when they had left Gracklestug, like the crew was hurt. 2 or 3 of the party members were unconscious because Elvira had thrown that insect plague that just wreaked havoc. The captain was all freaked out and was, I want more gold, I want more gold. Well, I basically said, okay, so, y'all been out in the Darklake region for a day or two now. You've had a long rest. The captain's calmed down a little bit. The cleric mentioned that she was helping heal members of the crew. One of the monks, a celestial monk, not a tiefling, but a celestial monk. They're brothers. One's a tiefling, one's a celestial. No, they're not brothers. They're part of the same monkish order, but they're brothers in real life. Where he's a tinker, so he was helping repair the boat because the insects, kind of did some damage, and there was, kind of a battle going on and all that stuff. So the captain was slowly chilling out and kind of warming up to him. And one thing I did, I described the Darklake district or region, not the district. The district is in Gracklestug. But, I really focused on, the frightening but also beautiful quality of the Underdark, and that, the Darklake was a region of, sometimes you're in a big like lake, and then sometimes you're in a narrow channel, and then sometimes you're in a little cavern, and then sometimes, and it's incredibly easy to get lost. If you don't have a guide with you, and luckily they had Shushar and the captain, it's real super easy to get lost. So I really focused in on that. And I mentioned occasionally small craft, like the boat they were on. I said it's kind of unusually large. You don't see a lot of that, but you see smaller kind of keel boats, kind of 6, 7 being boats, mostly gray dwarves and Kuatoa, um, mostly. And I would say occasionally Shushar would talk to the Kuatoa, and sometimes he would seem happy, and then sometimes he seemed kind of, um, you know, bothered, kind of foreshadowing that things aren't quite right in Sloobludop. But when they asked him about it, he was kind of tight-lipped. Um, and then the captain was kind of getting news and talking to passing boats. I said, you don't see a lot, just every now and then. Anyway, so I gave them a long rest, so they had their spells and they had, their hit points back and stuff like that. And I kind of tried to describe things. And I mentioned that the Kuatoa, Shushar shared with them that, uh, the Kuatoa almost see a mystical element to learning the ways of the Darklake. It kind of gets them in touch with, I think, almost a deity. It talks about in the book. It's mystical for them to try to learn the passages of the Darklake, and it's like a meditation for them. So after, last session being a real, just almost like 2 hour long battle, and there was a lot of, dungeon crawling, slogging for the past 2 or 3 months, I wanted to get into some more fun, like role play and stuff like that with this session purposefully. And I wish I could take credit for this idea, but it's not mine. There's a bud of mine online you can go to Twitch and find him. He's on YouTube. I'll try to put links in the show notes. His name is Dave Tabletopping, Dave Middleton Tabletopping, and you can find him on Twitch, and you can also find him on Twitter and on YouTube. And he does a lot of DMing stuff, and he's a good DM. He does a lot of different systems, but he definitely does D&D. And I was one of the things I didn't mention before when I prepare, especially if it's a new adventure or a new section of an adventure, I will try to find other DMs on YouTube or Let's Plays, people recording their play and get ideas, of either what to do or what not to do. And that's very helpful to me. So as I was getting ready for leaving Gracklestug, that's one of the things I was doing, and I listened to some of Dave's stuff. And he had this great idea so I'm not taking credit for this, thought it was a great idea, where I went around the table after I kind of introduced him to the concept of you're in the Darklake and here's what it's like and da-da-da. And I said, why don't each of you tell me something that you see, or experience on this boat journey? And it was really cool. I went around and everybody did something. I had people, everything from fishing to describing luminescent fish following the boat, to a crystal arch, kind of a natural crystal arch that they saw, to something kind of disturbing. It sounded like way out in the water, like following the boat and occasionally blowing air, they didn't say a whale, but that's kind of, like something like that. Um, I had one player, I think, that was kind of like, they weren't really, I mean, they didn't not like the idea. I think they just, couldn't think of anything on the spot. And I can't, even they, did something that was interesting. But yeah, we went around and everybody just had really neat ideas. And I enjoyed it, listening to their creativity. It helped flesh out the Darklake region to me, but it invested them in it. And at the end of the session, I said, okay, everybody give yourself 100 XP. I didn't say it right then, but when we were wrapping up, so give yourself 100 XP for, role playing and telling me what you see on the Darklake. But we went around and everybody kind of had a neat thing to contribute. So that was one of the cooler moments that we've had in a while. I really enjoyed it, and it seemed like that they enjoyed it too. So, that was cool. And then they were kind of role playing, interacting with the crew, kind of getting to know the crew better, in different ways, and that was fun. One of the mage got into a contest of prestidigitation versus the deep gnomes, innate magic, and stuff like that. It was just a lot of fun. Um, so had all that going on, and then for the random encounter, there's some random encounters that you can do in this game or in in the Darklake area. You know, there's terrain encounters and then there's random encounters. I rolled a little bit on that, but I wasn't really happy with the stuff that was coming up. So I ended up, I think one of the rolls I kept. The other stuff I just chose it. So I'm going to do this or I'm going to do that or I'm going to do that. And I had a fun little encounter with them where um, I there's one guy, Daggers the thief is blind. His character is blind, so we've given him, very good perception on hearing checks and that sort of thing. And I rolled, or no, I decided to have there. You can have a waterfall, and that waterfall can either have uh, a lock, where you can lower a boat, or not. And I decided, well, it's going to have a lock. And so the reason I did this was to kind of mess with the players' heads and kind of make them wonder, hey, are we in danger? But really just give them an interesting encounter. So I said, man, I said, Daggers, I said, you hear what you're pretty sure is like roaring water. And he's like, oh. And he's like, you know, like a waterfall? And I said, yeah, it sounds like a waterfall to you. And he's like, oh. And then, some other players say, well, can we roll to see if we hear it? And I don't think they heard it, or maybe one other one did. But, Daggers like tells everybody, and they're like, we better tell the captain. And they tell the captain, he's like, oh, that's good. That means we're right on course. And they're like, oh, whew, because at first they're thinking, hey, we're going over the waterfall. And so I had it a lock, and I described, the lock was cool and cunningly designed by Duergar Grey Dwarves, and, it lowers the boat and all that. And the tinker was trying to roll to see if he could figure out how it works and all that. So that was just a neat little, they were like, oh, they went down, and then they continued their journey. So that was a neat little encounter. And then, the captain had told them that, some of the Kuatoa I'm talking to sounds like, I don't know what's going on, but something seems maybe a little bit of tension in Sloobludop. So he said, I'm going to drop you like an hour's hike away from the town, or the village, instead of taking you straight there. And the reason I did that is because I didn't want them coming in by the sea or by the Darklake to Sloobludop. I want them walking in because there's two different factions of Kuatoa that will be competing to capture them, and I want to do that as part of the adventure rather than them just rolling up from the water and showing right up to the village. So I'd already established that was going to happen. And, they were like half a day's journey. He's like, we'll be there, in less than a day, about half a day. And I think I rolled naturally a rock fall. So I allowed a rock fall to happen. It's one of the terrain encounters that can happen. And Stool got hurt. I think another NPC got hurt. Some crew members got hurt. I think everybody else made their saves. Or I think Flint the Dwarf, one of our player characters, or maybe even Eldith, got hit. But they get hit by rocks, and it damaged the boat. So that was, they got them healed, and that was a chance to do a long rest. He said, I'm going to drop anchor. I'm not going to drop by the shore because you never know what's going to come on the boat. But he's like, we're going to stop here, and we're going to repair the boat and, continue on. So that was a chance for another long rest. And I decided I was going to roll to see if they had an encounter. But I said, you know what? I'm going to give them an encounter. So I rolled a little bit, but again, I just wasn't, it's like, I don't really like those roll results. I used to be like, whatever I roll is what I do, because I love the knuckle biting chaos of, the randomness of the roll. But no, I went ahead and chose some stuff. So what I chose was, they had a double guard, there was extra crew watching and all that, because, they didn't want stuff climbing up on the boat. Well, sure enough, in the middle of like second watch, they hear this voice in, switching between Undercommon and Dwarven saying, help me, help me, help me. It's a female voice. And I'm like, what? And they're like trying to help her over. And they're like, wow, there's a woman out there. And there's a Grey Dwarf female in the water. Like, help me. I can't believe it. This is a miracle. I can't believe you're here. So they pull her on board, and she's all scratched up and everything. And she just runs the one player that had said he was on second watch. And I think I did roll for the watch, if I remember right. But anyway, one player what happened to be a dwarf, Flint the dwarf barbarian. I just had her run and just hang onto his neck, like, oh, don't let me go, don't. I'm just terrified. And he's like, what's going on? She's like, oh, it's just terrible. Da, da, da. Well, then the crew that's looking over the boat, like, oh my goodness, because she's like, it's behind me, and they're like, oh my goodness, and this big troll lumbers onto the boat, and like, just for dramatic effect, I had it like kill a crew member, like crunch, and just throw it over the, the side of the boat, one of the deep gnomes, and so, of course, chaos ensues. Uh, the rest of the players get involved within a couple of rounds. Long story short, I had them fighting the troll, and the female gray dwarf that's holding on to the player, she is like, oh, don't let me go, don't let me go. Well, in effect, is really a green hag under an illusion, and had led this troll here on purpose, just to cause chaos. And so 2 or 3 rounds in, she's like, hey, don't you love me? And then boom, just, because he's trying to get her off of him, doing contested strength checks and all this. And he's like, man, that's a strong dwarf, or strong whatever. And really, it's using the strength of a green hag. But she finally reveals herself. She's like, hee hee hee. And it was just a great moment. And I already knew that I didn't want the green hag the green hag was not going to stand there and battle to the death, was just trying to cause chaos and tragedy, and because they feed on tragedy, and so loved this idea of, this woman being chased by a troll, and anyway, it's like, oh, what's going on, and just the drama of it all. And anyway, long story short, they one or two of them made nature checks to realize, oh, this is a troll, and fire and acid and all that. So they finally kill the troll, and then they focus on the green hag, and she's like, hee hee hee. Well, they have an innate invisibility that you can only track them through magical means. So once attention turned on her, she turned invisible and jumped over the boat, over the side of the boat. And it was a fun encounter. They enjoyed it. And I did that because I wasn't quite ready to have them. I didn't, the timing of everything, I wasn't ready to have them slogging towards Sloobludop and to start being captured. Okay, there just wasn't time, I think, to do that effectively. So I had this encounter that was fun, and that they enjoyed, and that I enjoyed. And then that, interrupted the rest. So they were basically going to do another long rest. And, between all the fire getting thrown around and this and that, and the boat got damaged even more. So that, the captain's wanting to repair the boat. And that's where we ended things. So next session, they will be getting dropped off and hiking into Sloobludop, whereupon they are going to encounter the religious factions that are competing, one of them wanting to sacrifice them, and the other one just wanting to use them to get close to the other faction. And then it's all going to end with Demogorgon rising up out of the water. I just can't wait. It's probably going to take a couple of sessions to do Sloobludop. And 2 of my players are going to be gone next week, so I'm going to intentionally only let it go so far. I'll probably interject some role play because I definitely want them there for the big. So anyway, that's how things are going with my group currently in Out of the Abyss. I hope you enjoyed my notes earlier on how I DM. If you agree or disagree or have some other thoughts or whatever, please leave comments. Appreciate the comments. Thanks for watching. This is proving, at least as far as getting comments and stuff like that, and people saying, hey, well, this is proving to be a popular playlist, a series of videos. So I'm glad that people are getting use and enjoyment out of it, and that's really cool. Anyway, we will catch you next time. Please leave the video a thumbs up. It may be a comment that helps me a lot, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And